Yeah, but then I'll have to go back to it. I might keep you here too long. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Gopinatha, Radha Gopinatha, Radha Gopinatha, Radhe. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Vaisheshika Acharya Sutra Satya Shri Srimadhava Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patithanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Morning. We continue reading from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 87, the prayers of the personified Vedas, which has long been one of my favorite chapters. I think it's a chapter that devotees sometimes struggle with because it's long and it's very philosophical, but it's also extremely beautiful. And today we have a very philosophical verse, so it has a very long purport, so I might, instead of reading the purport in one go, kind of break it up, and hopefully we'll get to the entire purport by the end of it, but let's see how time goes. Okay. Do you have a particular... No, never mind. I'll just do it. Janima satas sato mriti mutatmani ye cha vidham. Vipanamritam smarantyupadishanti ta arupitai. Trigunamaya pumaniti bhidaya dabodha krita. Tvaina tata paratra cha bhavet sabhavet avabodharase. Janima satas sato mriti mutatmani ye cha vidam. Viparnamritam smarantyupadishanti ta arupitai. Trigunamaya pumaniti bhidaya dabodha krita. Tvaina tata paratra sabhavet avabodharase. Janima satas sato mriti mutatmani ye cha vidham. Viparnamritam smarantyupadishanti ta arupitai. Trigunamaya pumaniti vidhaya dabodha krita. Tvaina tata paratra sabhaveta vabodharase.
Janima sata sato mriti mutatmani ye chavidam.
Janima sata sato mriti mutatmani ye chavidam.
Vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta arupite.
Vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta arupite.
Trigunamaya punam iti vidayat aboda krita.
Iti vidhaya dabodha krita.
Tvaina tata paratra subhavet avabodarase.
Tvaina tata paratra sabhaveta vabodharase.
Janimasita sato vritim mutatmaniye sabidam.
Janimasita sato vritim mutatmaniye sabidam.
Vipanamritam smaranti upadashanti arupitai.
Vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta arupitai.
Trigunamaya pumamiti vidaya aboda krita.
Trigunamaya pumaniti vidhaya dabodha krita.
Tvainatata paratra sabhavetava bodharase.
Tvaina tata paratra sabhaveta vabodharase. Vaishnavis? Vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta arupite. Trigunamaya pumaniti vidhaya dabodha krita. Tvaina tata paratra sabhaveta vabodharase. Janima satas sato mriti mutatmani ye chavidam. Vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta arupite. Trigunamaya pumaniti vidhaya dabodha krita. Tvaina tata paratra sabhaveta vabodharase. Janim, creation. Asataha, of the manifest world, from atoms. Sataha, of that which is eternal. Mritim, destruction. Uta, also. Atmani, in the soul. Ye, who. Cha, and. Bhidam, duality. Viparnam, mundane business. Ritam, real. Smaranti, declare authoritatively. Upadishanti, they teach. Te, they. Arupite, in terms of illusions imposed on reality. Tri, three. Guna, of the material modes. Maya, composed. Puman, the living entity. Iti, thus. Vida, dualistic conception. Yat, which. Abodha, by ignorance. Krita, created. Tvai, in you. Na, not. Tata, to such. Paratra, transcendental, saha, that ignorance, bhavet, can exist, avabodha, total consciousness, rase, whose composition, and then translation. Supposed authorities who declare that matter is the origin of existence, that the permanent qualities of the soul can be destroyed, that the self is compounded of separate aspects of spirit and matter, or that material transactions constitute reality. All such authorities base their teachings on mistaken ideas that hide the truth. The dualistic conception that the living entity is produced from the three modes of nature is simply a product of ignorance. Such a conception has no real basis in you, for you are transcendental to all illusion and always enjoy perfect, total awareness. So we have the Shrutis, the personified Vedas, which as we read through the chapter, we come to realize that it's primarily the Upanishads who are taking who are speaking here. Many of these verses echo the teachings of the prominent Upanishads. They're awakening the Lord with prayers. They're offering these prayers to the Lord in order to awaken him. And this is when a king awakens. We have an alarm clock that awakes us. That's sort of a very unpleasant noise that awakes us. But when a king wakes up, he has bards that sing his glories. This is one of the great pleasures of being a king, I suppose. I'm not sure I would like it very much, but I suppose kings like this, that they have bards who come in and sing their glories. And so in the same way here, the Lord is being awakened by the personified Vedas, and they're praising by the Upanishads, they're praising the Lord and highlighting the special characteristics of the Lord. And so we have this beautiful meter that is used here. Janimasatas sato mriti mudatmani ye chabidam. There's a nice rhythm to this. It's a nice way to wake up. And so they're offering these prayers to the Lord. And we've heard in the previous verse how they were stating that the Lord is actually very difficult to understand. Actually, it's impossible to understand the Lord, to know the Lord. And this is one of the recurring themes in these prayers, where they say that here you are, and we are describing you. We are the Upanishads, we're the Vedanta, we're the final word of the Vedas, but even you are beyond our conception. We're supposed to be teaching about you. We make you known to the world. But how can we possibly do this when you are beyond all conceptions and when you are beyond word and speech? As we hear in the Taittiriya Upanishad, Tato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. That words and speech, they try to reach the Lord, but they have to come back unsuccessfully. They can never kind of capture the Lord. And so in the previous verse, we and actually, I mean, the whole chapter, why Shukadev Goswami narrating these things is because the whole chapter started with a question that how can the Lord, who's beyond all conceptions, beyond everything material, how can he be talked about meaningfully? And of course, this is an important consideration for us, since the Bhagavatam repeatedly says we should hear about the Lord, and we should do Shravanam and Kirtanam. We should hear about the descriptions of the Lord, and we should praise the Lord. But how can we do this if the Lord is beyond our conception, if the Lord is, as the Upanishads say, beyond speech? And so this in Shukadev Goswami is narrating this whole chapter and narrating, repeating these prayers of the personified Vedas in answer to that question. And so in the previous verse, we heard that we heard that we are all born after the Lord. When we came into existence, the Lord already existed. When this whole world came into existence, the Lord already existed. When the first living entity, Lord Brahma, came into existence, the Lord was already there. And therefore, how can we know him? We cannot see him come into being. You might say, well, I know my child because I've seen, or a child because I've seen the child born and grow up and develop and so on. But the Lord already was there before us. And even more so than that is that when everything ceases to be, when the whole world is terminated, is ended, and is reabsorbed into the being of the Lord, then everything is gone. Everything that is here in this world, all our minds and our bodies and everything that speech refers to is also gone. And therefore, how can we possibly understand the Lord? We exist for a brief moment in between those two states of only the Lord existing and only the Lord existing at the end. And therefore, whatever knowledge that we generate is just a small thing. And so how can we possibly know the Lord? This was what the previous verse said. And in this verse, that theme continues, and the Vedas are pointing out that many people have tried to understand not just the Lord, but also themselves in relationship to the Lord, and they've come to wrong conclusions. And we sometimes hear about these wrong. We often hear about the wrong conclusions, but we often have an attitude of, let's show how foolish they are, and so on. But we see here in this context, yes, we will see that the Vedas are saying they are foolish for coming to those conclusions. But we also see, if we see the verse in the context of all the other verses preceding and following, we see that also it's kind of understandable that people are confused about these things, because it is very difficult to understand these topics. And so this is what this verse is pointing out, that how difficult it is to come to the right conclusion, and how fortunate it is if someone comes to the right conclusion, and that when we come to the right conclusion, that it is not our doing, but that it is the grace of the Lord. The Lord allows us to come to that right conclusion. In other words, we can expect to be bewildered. We can expect to be confused about these things. It's actually quite surprising if we get it right. It's quite extraordinary that if a person gets it right. And so in this verse, actually let's read the first paragraph of the purport. It says, the true position of the Supreme Personality is a sublime mystery, as is also the dependent position of the Jiva soul. Most thinkers are mistaken in one way or another about these truths, since there are countless varieties of false designation that can cover the soul and create illusion. Foolish conditioned souls submit to obvious delusions, but the illusory power of Maya can easily subvert the intelligence of even the most sophisticated philosophers and mystics. Thus, there are always divergent schools of thought propounding conflicting theories concerning concerning basic principles of truth. And so, in the verse at the end of the second line, we get why do people come to different conclusions? It's of course, as we'll see, the verse refers to a series of schools of thought that were prominent in India for many centuries, and they're all sort of using reasoning in some ways. They're all reasonable sort of schools of philosophy in one way or another. They're all committed to thinking things through and trying to come to the right conclusion in things. And sometimes people value reason very highly for this reason, that the reason is important to come to a certain truth, to come to truth that cannot be sort of falsified, that we can be certain about, and that we can then, in the Indian context at least, that we can then use to attain liberation, to become free from this world and transcend this world and come to a truth that is not relative, that is not constantly changing as we find in this world, but that is eternal and permanent. And so this is what all Indian schools of thought are trying to do, well, nearly all. The Charvakas or the Lokayatas, the materialists, they're not interested in that, but all the other schools, they're trying to do this. But as the verse here says, it's not just that they're doing this through logic, but it's also arupite. There's something that is, they're coming up with these various conclusions. They're at the end of so vipanamritam smaranti upadeshanti ta arupita. So they're smaranti, they're thinking, they're meditating on these ideas that we'll talk about in a moment. They're upadeshanti, they're teaching these to others. But why are they doing this? Arupite. Because, as we heard in the word for word, because this is in terms of illusions imposed on reality. They're doing this not just because of logic, but because their logic is there's something that's been superimposed on this. And so if you think of the famous analogy that we hear often of the snake, which is superimposed on the rope. So say I perceive a rope, I misperceive the rope as a snake. And so the idea of the snake has been superimposed onto the rope. It's a concoction of my ignorance. It's a product of my ignorance. Perhaps the conditions of perception were not optimal. Somebody left a piece of rope in the temple here, and I come in the evening when the lights are a bit dim, and I see this rope, and I freak out, and I go, oh, there's a snake in the temple room, and I run out of the temple room, and I go and look for somebody who's braver than me to deal with this. And so there, what am I doing? I'm perceiving a rope, but I've superimposed the idea of a snake onto it. And so the person who left the rope here might say, you silly person, I'll show you, this is just a rope that I left there earlier today. And they might turn on the light and I see, there's just a rope, and the snake is gone. And so I have this superimposition, this notion that I've superimposed on the reality that is the rope. And so in the same way, the personified Vedas are saying, this is what philosophers are doing. They're trying to understand the nature of reality. They're trying to understand the nature of the self. But because of the nature of this material world, because of the nature of conditioned life, they're constantly superimposing ideas onto the nature of the soul and the nature of the Lord, and therefore they're mistaking them. But there's two sides to this. The one thing that when I'm perceiving the rope as a snake, I'm only perceiving the rope, and I'm trying to understand the nature of the rope. But there's something coming in my way of perceiving the rope correctly, and that is that ignorance. I might have I don't know what the technical term would be, but a snake phobia, and therefore I see snakes everywhere, and so that's my own conditioning that causes me to perceive the rope as a snake. And so in the same way, philosophers are trying to understand the nature of the world and come up with explanations of it. They're trying to understand the nature of themselves. But there are these things that block them from seeing the true nature of things. And what is this arupita? What is that thing which is superimposed? We have it here in that first paragraph of the purport, that foolish conditioned souls submit to obvious delusions, submit to these delusions of the superimposition. They perceive snakes when there are only ropes. But the illusory power of Maya can easily subvert the intelligence of even the most sophisticated philosophers and mystics. And so no wonder we are confused about things, because we're not just dealing with ourselves, but we're dealing with the energies of the Lord. We're dealing with the deluding power of the Lord. In the 6th canto, we have this verse that's Yachaktayo vadatam vadinam vai vivadasam vada bhuvo bhavanti kurvanti chaisham muhuratma moham tasmai namo nanta gunaya bhumne. And this is a prayer to the Lord, and says, I offer my obeisances to the Lord, who is ananta guna, who has unlimited qualities, and therefore is beyond the range of my speech, which can never capture him, because he always eludes it, because there's always more gunas, more qualities that cannot be grasped. But what it says is, Yachaktayo vadatam vadinam vai vivadasam vada bhuvo bhavanti. It says that your shaktis, my Lord, your potencies, your powers, they are the ground. They cause disagreement among philosophers and agreement among philosophers. Vivada samvada bhuvo bhavanti. This is the ground for the vivada, the disagreement, and the samvada, the agreement between the philosophers. And kurvanti chaisham muhuratma moham. And therefore, because the great philosophers, the great debaters, they're constantly deluded by your potencies. Therefore, kurvanti chaisham muhuratma moham. They're constantly falling into delusion about who they are, about the atma, about the self, about the soul. And so this is a verse that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's brother-in-law, Gopinatha Acharya, when they're debating about the nature of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya asks Gopinath, he says, how can you believe that this person is the Supreme Lord? And they have this debate back and forth. And in Kavikarnapur's Chaitanya Chandrodaya, Gopinath finally cites this verse, And Sarvabhauma's reply to this is he laughs and he says, yes, we know you're a Vaishnav. And so he sees this is the characteristic of a Vaishnav. A Vaishnav sees that all these great philosophies, all these debates that are happening in the world, these are just the product of Maya, these are the product of the energies of the Lord. And therefore we shouldn't take them too seriously. We shouldn't be too invested in them, and we should just be focused on our worship of the Lord and our service to the Lord. This is the nature of a Vaishnava according to Gopinatha Acharya. And we shouldn't think that the verse says Vivada Samvada Bhuvo Bhavanti. There's Vivada, there's disagreement, but there's Samvada, there's agreement. But the commentators point out that it's not that, yes, they're disagreeing and therefore they're in illusion, but when they come to an agreement, they get to the truth. They says, no, even when they come to an agreement, they're still in illusion. They're still wrong about things. Kurvanti Chaisham, Muharatma Moham. Repeatedly, they become deluded, they become bewildered about the nature of who they are. And so yes, we see all these philosophies, and we shouldn't be surprised because this is the nature of the Lord's Shaktis. This is the nature of the Lord's energy. This is the nature of being in this world, is that we become bewildered by these things. And therefore, because we become bewildered, therefore we start superimposing things onto reality. In the prayers of the wives of Kaliya, there's a very interesting line in one of these verses where they offer prayers to Krishna, and at one point they say, Nana Vadanurodhaya. I said, we offer our obeisances to you who comply with different philosophies, who allow different philosophies to exist and allow them to catch something of you perhaps, but not quite. In the 11th canto, Krishna explains to Uddhava, Evam vivadatam hetu shaktayo me duratya. He says, we see that there are all these different philosophies are there. Why are all these different philosophies there? Because shaktayo me duratya, because of my shaktis. They exist because of my potencies. And my potencies are duratya. They're insurmountable. You cannot overcome them. And therefore, we should expect there to be different philosophies. And so what are the different philosophies that the Shrutis are here pointing out? The translation is sort of unpacking the meaning of the words. But in as we'll see, the way the Upanishads the Shrutis are praying here, it's very concise and very condensed. And so the first thing they say, the first view they represent is Janimasata. There is the Jani, the birth, asata, of the unreal. That's the first statement. Or the birth from the unreal. You can read it in both ways. And the commentators, as we have here in the purport, the first kind of view they identify this with is a view of the school of Vaisheshika. And the school of Vaisheshika is a school that once upon a time was quite prominent, but sort of declined in prominence quite a while ago. But it was a school that's mostly known for its view of everything, or consisting of atoms, of karnas, of little particles that sort of come together. This world is nothing but a conglomerate of these different particles that come together. And the particles in themselves are invisible, but as they become kind of cling to each other and come together, then that creates the visible world. This is the view that is propounded by a person whose name we actually don't know. He's always referred to as Karnada or Karnabhuj, which literally means the eater of atoms. Which is obviously not his name. It's the name that was ascribed to him, that he's the guy who's eating atoms all the time. This is what he's doing. He has another name too by which he's known. He's known as the Uluka, as the owl. And the story goes that he was an ascetic, he was a sadhu, but he was very ugly. And therefore when he used to go begging for food, people would be scared of him and would not want to give him food. So therefore he only went begging at night when it was dark and people couldn't see him, and therefore people started giving him the nickname that he's Uluka Muni, he's the owl Muni, who lives at night and eats at night. So we don't know his name, but those are the two sort of sort of names by which he's known. And what does the Vaisheshika Sutras, the foundational text for the school of Vaisheshika, what does that what do they teach? They say, well, what I said, so the atoms kind of come together and create the visible world. But the Vedanta Sutras and the school of Vedanta sort of, and most other schools as well, have big difficulties with this, because the atoms, if you think of the world as indeed consisting of atoms, what puts the atoms together? What causes this to lead to the jhana, or the jhani here, to the birth, the creation of the world? How can this arise from mere atoms that somehow come together? Since atoms are insentient, there's no consciousness there, so how does that emerge? And so in some ways, Prabhupada, actually in Krishna book, when he's sort of paraphrasing or sort of commenting on this verse, he talks about the Vaisheshika school, and he says these are like the modern scientists, sort of a materialistic school. But there's one difference where I suppose the Vaisheshika school, there's still some spirituality there. And so they say, okay, well, what causes the atoms to all come together? And they say, it's the adrishta, it's the unseen power, which is the adrishta is the unseen power of karma. So we perform actions, and I perform an action now, and this action will have a reaction. But how can this action that I perform now, and that is kind of, I punch somebody in the nose, it's a momentary action, and then I will suffer the consequences of that at some later point. But so Indian philosophers have long kind of questioned, well, how is this possible? Since the action is already terminated, and a few years down the line, I might have a reaction from this. So how can this be the response of this action that is performed if that action is already terminated? So they say, well, actually, what happens is I perform this action, and this generates the adrishta, the unseen effect of the action that will then be manifested at some later time. And so the adrishta, the unseen, is the conglomerate of all of all karmic actions of living beings. And when the world is created, in very similar to the way the Bhagavatam presents it, that when the world is created, it's the karma of living beings is kind of suspended, and then the world is created and the karma is kind of set in motion again, and we're kind of back in the world, and we resume where we left off at the end of the previous creation. So the Vaisheshika school says it's the adrishta, it's the unseen that causes the atoms to come together. But the purport refers to this sutra from the Vedanta Sutra 2.2.12, Ubhayatapi na karmatas tadabhava, which it says here, according to the sutra, one cannot claim that at any time of creation atoms first combine together because they are impelled by some karmic impulse, adhering in the atoms themselves, since atoms by themselves in their primeval state, before combining into complex objects, have no ethical responsibility that might lead them to acquire pious and sinful reactions. Nor can the initial combination of atoms be explained as a result of the residual karma of the living entities who lie dormant prior to creation, since these reactions are each jiva's own and cannot be transferred from them even to other jivas, what to speak of inert atoms. And so the idea is that you can't, the critique is you can't say, well, the adrishta, this sort of power, causes karma to, causes the atoms to kind of come together, because the atoms are insentient, and therefore there's no adrishta that sort of clings to them. And neither can you argue that it's the jivas who somehow have the adrishta kind of clinging to them and then cause the things to kind of come together, the world to come together. Because as we'll see, the Vaisheshika school has a similar view as the Nyaya school, which we'll hear in a moment. Which argues that actually the soul is not conscious until the material world comes into existence, and therefore we cannot argue that either. And therefore, how does it come together? Early Vaisheshika is actually atheistic. They have the Vaisheshika sutras make no mention of God whatsoever. There's no conception of a supreme being that sort of puts the atoms together, which in some ways would solve the issue. If they said, well, there's a supreme being that puts the atoms together and this solves the issue, I think most other schools would kind of back off. But all the other schools are kind of criticizing Vaisheshika for saying it doesn't work. You can't just start with matter. And so you're saying Janimasata, there's the birth of the asat, of the unreal, the material thing, which doesn't work because you need a conscious being that sort of sets things in motion. So that's the first view that's being presented here as a wrong view. And in some ways it's as we'll see, it doesn't quite fit so well with the other views, because all the other views have to do not with the world, but with the soul, with the self, with the individual. And so some commentators read this Janimasata also in a different way, as referring to the in relation to the soul, and that's the view you get next presented in the purport. Which is the view that this refers to the school of yoga, of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras or Yoga Shastra. And what does Patanjali argue in this view is that there is the jani, the birth from asat, from unreal things, from temporary things. And here the birth does not refer to the birth of the world then, but it refers to the sort of the higher birth, if you want, the attainment of liberation. That how can we attain liberation? We can attain liberation by asat, by temporary things, by yogic practice, by our meditational practice, by our asanas and so on. By this we can attain liberation. And the purport, this is the third paragraph, it says, alternatively, the phrase Janimasata can be taken to allude to the yoga philosophy of Patanjali Rishi, inasmuch as this Yoga Sutras teach one how to achieve the transcendental status of Brahmanhood by a mechanical process of exercise and meditation. Patanjali's yoga method is here called asat because it ignores the essential aspect of devotion, surrender to the will of the Supreme Person. As Lord Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, Ashadhayahutam dattam tapastaptam kritam chayat asat iti uchate partha nachatat pretya no iha. Anything done as sacrifice, charity or penance without faith in the Supreme, O son of Pritha, is asat, is impermanent. It is called asat and is useless both in this life and in the next. In the purport to the previous verse, the verse from the Brahma Samhita was cited. Pantastu koti shatavatsara sampradam yovaratapi manaso munipumgavanam. That the great yogis, they're trying to achieve the lotus feet of the Lord. They're trying to come to a realization of the ultimate principle of everything. And therefore, in Saraswati Thakur's language, they're drilling the respiration, they're training their breathing, they're doing pranayama. Drilling not as in, boring, but as in, like you're drilling an animal, you're training an animal. And yet, they can only aspire for it. They can never actually achieve it, because this is all asat. This is all temporary things, and by the temporary you cannot come to the permanent. And so this is the difficulty with the school of yoga. And then the second view, or the third view, depending on the way you calculate, but the second part is then satomritim. So we have the janimasata, the birth from the asat, from the unreal, and now we have the sataha of the real. There is the mriti, there is the death. So we have the opposite. And this is taken as a reference to the school of Nyaya. And the school of Nyaya is indeed a school that is aiming for liberation. They're a theistic school. They argue that the ultimate principle is God, and they're trying to establish the existence of God through reasoning, through logic, particularly inferential reasoning, and so that we can have certain knowledge of the nature of God and therefore can attain liberation. But one of the things that the school of Nyaya is repeatedly mocked for in other schools is their concept of liberation. They argue that the soul is one of the constituent parts of this world, so we have the different things of matter and the different elements and so on. And the soul is one of them, as Vaisheshika also teaches. But they argue that the properties we associate with the soul, the things that we think are the characteristics of the soul, these are actually only coming into being in this world by the contact of the soul with the antakarana, with the mind. And so agency, for example, but especially, most importantly, consciousness, they argue, is actually a byproduct, is not a property of the soul, but is actually something that arises when the soul comes into contact with the mind, and then consciousness emerges. So it's very similar to a lot of contemporary views of the nature of consciousness as a sort of even if they might not posit there being a soul, it's still sort of seen as a byproduct of matter in a sense. So here, it's a similar kind of view that you have there. What this means, of course, is that when you attain liberation, according to the Nyayikas, according to the followers of the school of Nyaya, it means that you become free from matter, you become aloof from matter, you transcend matter, and because of that, there's no longer a contact between the mind and the soul, and therefore you lose consciousness. And so the state of liberation is not a state of consciousness, which is why all the other schools always say, it's like, why would we want to become a stone? What kind of concept of liberation is this? That you become a stone, you become a rock, you become an insentient being. This is not something that is very appealing, and therefore this cannot be the ultimate goal, because the ultimate goal must be something that we desire, but no one desires to become insentient and become a rock or a stone. And therefore, satomritim, there is the death of the real. The Upanishads, the Shrutis are saying that the real is the soul, and the soul is of the nature of consciousness. The soul has the property of consciousness, but also is of the very nature of consciousness. And so therefore, if you eradicate consciousness, the soul ceases to be. There cannot be a soul without consciousness. The school of Nyaya, let's see how we're doing with time. The school of Nyaya argues for this because they say, well, we see that consciousness kind of comes and goes and therefore cannot be a property of the soul. We see when we go to sleep and we attain this state of, when we're dreaming, there's still consciousness there. We're not conscious of the external world, but we're conscious of the dreams that we have and can be quite wild and all sorts of things that we identify with. But then there's a third sort of layer, a state of consciousness, which is a state of deep sleep, a dreamless sleep. When we're in there, which is like a state of unconsciousness. It seems like unconscious. We're not aware of anything. And so they say, see, we lose consciousness in that state. So if we lose consciousness in that state, therefore consciousness cannot be a property of the soul, because we would be always conscious then. And therefore consciousness must be a byproduct of the soul, must be kind of an accidental property of the soul. The Upanishads refute this and argue that actually, even in the state of deep sleep, we are still conscious. The state of deep sleep is not a state of unconsciousness, but it's a state of consciousness that is aware only of itself. And so it's a state of self-reflexive consciousness, of consciousness where it has no other object to be aware of because there's no dreams and there's no waking state and so on. So the only thing it becomes aware of is itself. And the schools of Vedanta argue that the proof for this is that when we wake up from deep sleep, what do we say? Ah, that was nice. I slept very well. And so I said, I enjoyed this. And so there's still a conception of I, so there's still some form of awareness there, but it's an awareness that is very limited in some ways, because there's no object of awareness other than awareness itself, other than consciousn's itself. And therefore, as the purport cites, the Vedanta Sutras univocally states, Gyota eva, this jiva soul is always a knower. We have to posit that this is one of the essential characteristics of the soul, when you cannot sort of separate consciousness from the soul. And therefore this view that satomritim, that there is death of consciousness, that there is death of the soul, that the state of liberation is kind of an ultimate state in the view of the Nyayikas of deep sleep, of sort of an unconscious state that you enter into. This is one of the false conceptions that is the product of our superimposition onto this. And then we have a third view that is presented here, Atmani yecha bidam. And this is the view of the school of Sankhya, which argues that, literally it says that there is bidha, there is division in the Atman, in the soul, or in the self. And this can be interpreted in two ways. On the one hand, it can be interpreted, if we take Atmani here, not just as the soul, but as the supreme soul, as the super soul, then Sankhya argues that there are many different souls, that we are all souls, and the souls are conscious, so they're an improvement on the school of Nyaya. Consciousness is the inalienable characteristic of the soul. But there's many of them, and Sankhya is atheistic, and therefore does not have a view of a supreme soul. And so from the viewpoint of Vedanta or of the Upanishads, what they're doing is they're taking the supreme soul and dividing the soul into lots of little souls. Whereas the Chandogya Upanishad teaches that the Sat, the reality, is Ekameva Advitiya, is one only and without a second. It is indivisible, and there is no second to compete with it. And so all reality, as we hear in these prayers of the personified Vedas, is the reality of the Lord. The Lord is the only thing that exists. And of course we exist within the Lord, but we are part of the Lord. But since Sankhya doesn't have a conception of a supreme soul, therefore it only has a conception of individual souls. Therefore it seems to be dividing the one soul into many souls, and has no kind of overarching conception. So that's one way in which Sankhya is referred to here. The other way is, the other thing that Sankhya does is it argues, it's an improvement on Nyaya in that it says, yes, we have consciousness. Consciousness, I am a conscious being, and that's the whole point of the school of Sankhya, is to learn to distinguish between the seer and the seen. So there is me as the seer, as the conscious subject of all my experiences, and I have to learn, and the problem is now that I identify with the things that are seen, so the body, the mind, the thoughts, and so on, the objects that we see in the world, we identify with this, but we have to come to separate those two. We have to come to see that actually I'm different from the things that I perceive. I am pure consciousness itself. But where Sankhya goes wrong is that they say, one of the things that I perceive and that I mistakenly identify with is agency. I think I am the doer, the agent of my actions. I think I perform the actions that are performed in reality, according to Sankhya, merely by the body. And so they argue the body is kind of acting, the body is a product of Prakriti, of matter. I am the Purusha, I'm the spirit, I'm the soul, the conscious being. But Prakriti is always active. It's the nature of Prakriti to be constantly changing and evolving and so on. Whereas the soul, the Purusha, according to Sankhya, is inactive. It performs no actions other than witnessing. It is merely a passive witness of all the changes that are constantly occurring. And so in the words of the Shrutis here, Utatmani yecha vidam, they create a division in the Atman, in the self, and the soul, by saying that consciousness, yes, this is of the soul, but agency, this is belonging to Prakriti. They separate that from it and sort of create sort of a dual self, if you want. So we as persons, if we think of agency as an intrinsic aspect of personhood, that we have the capacity to act and the capacity to be responsible for our actions, then Sankhya is dividing the soul or the self and saying these are residing in two very different things. Agency belongs to matter. The Vedanta Sutras has a very interesting sort of argument against this, and it says karta, the soul must be the karta, must be the agent of its action. Why must the soul be the agent of its actions? Shastrarthavatvat, because of scripture having meaning. This is the argument. And so they say the soul must be the agent of actions, of our actions. We must be responsible for our actions, and we must have the capacity to perform actions. Because if we didn't, then all of scripture would be meaningless and would have no function, would have no purpose whatsoever. Because what is scripture there to do, if you think of it in terms of the karma kanda, swarga kamo yajeta, one who desires to go to heaven should perform a sacrifice. This is an injunction. This is a command that the Vedas make and say, if you want to do this, then this is what, if you want to attain this, this is what you need to do. Or we hear, that you should strive for liberation, or you should worship the Lord, or whatever the injunctions might be in scripture. if we were not the agent of our actions, then Scripture would have no point, because what is Scripture addressing then? If agency is part of the body or the intellect, as Sankhya would argue, the sort of the subtle body, if that is where agency resides, then the intellect is insentient. It has no consciousness, so therefore it cannot be aware of commands. It cannot be aware of things that are dictated to it. So I can say, I can, at the end of the class, I can tell this desk or this seat to go back there, but there's no point telling me to this little table to go there, because this is an insentient object, and therefore it has no capacity to be aware of what I'm telling it, and therefore it cannot have agency either. And so therefore we must be the agent of our actions, because otherwise all of Scripture becomes meaningless, and therefore the view of Sankhya is untenable as well. We have one final view that is presented here, Viparnamritam, and this is the view of the school of Mimamsa, which is a ritual school. It's a school that's rooted in the Vedas. Unlike Sankhya, it does argue that we are the agent of our actions, so it's again a somewhat improvement on the previous view. But here, the word that is used is actually quite remarkable. It says, so the Viparnam, the word for word, or as we have it in the translation, that material transactions constitute rita, or reality, that material transactions are real. Viparnam literally means trading, or the marketplace. It's the commerce, it's the transactions of things. And so they're making a value judgment already of the sort of things that the school of Mimamsa is concerned about. They're thinking that agency is important. We are indeed the agents, but what are the actions that we should do? Is we should perform Vedic sacrifices. This is the whole purpose of life. The purpose of life is to follow dharma. What is dharma? Chodana lakshanorta dharma. The dharma is that which is indicated by the injunctions of the Vedas. The injunctions of the Vedas tell us to perform sacrifices, therefore we should perform sacrifices. And what is the result of sacrifices? We go to Svarga, we go to heaven, and this is the ultimate goal of life, because the state, heaven, as it is described in the Vedas, is a state of joy, is a state of happiness, and therefore, since we all strive for happiness, since we all want to attain happiness, therefore this is the thing that we should strive for. But as the Upanishad or the Shrutis are here pointing out, this is Viparna, this is the marketplace, this is trading, this is commerce. Srila Sridhar Swami, in his commentary on this verse, he says Viparnam means karma phala vyavahara, means the transactions of the fruits of action. And so we're bartering, we're kind of trading for the fruits of our actions. We perform an action and then we get a result of that. We get in the 11th canto, Bhajanti ye yatha devan, deva api tatevatan, chayeva karma sachiva, sadavo dina vatsala, where it says that I do something, and what I do, the gods, the demigods, they reciprocate just in kind. Karma sachiva, they're like the attendants of karma. They're like, a king has his attendants. A king goes somewhere, and all the attendants kind of, follow behind the king and kind of are there to serve the king in whatever way. And so they say in the same way, the demigods, they're karma sachiva, they're the attendants of karma. They have no real agency there. It's a mere business transaction that is being conducted here. I perform my action, the demigods will reciprocate with me, and I'm performing the action not to please the demigods, but so that I get the result from the actions. This is how the Bhagavatam presents it. So it's just business. It is just a marketplace where the currency of the marketplace is our karma phala, or the results of our actions, and we're kind of trading with the demigods and saying, okay, I give you this, you give me this, can you give me a better price, can you do better than this? And the demigods go, for you no profit, and this is how it goes on. And so they're right in arguing that the soul has agency, that we are the performers of our actions, but they're misguided because their actions are directed to the wrong types of action. We know that from the Bhagavatam and from the Upanishads, that ultimately all these actions are there to help us to become more detached from this world and to help us cultivate knowledge of the Lord and of the soul, and therefore attain liberation. So the Mimamsa goes, okay, they're okay, but they're still falling short of the ultimate thing. And so vipanamritam smaranti upadishanti ta'arupitai. So they're remembering this, they're meditating on this, they're reflecting on these ideas, and they're upadishanti, they're teaching this to others. But all of this is arupitai, as I mentioned, all of this is because of the superimposition of their false conceptions. Trigunamaya pumaniti vidhaya dabhoda krita. And thus they think of the puman, of the person, as of the soul, as trigunamaya, consisting of the three modes of material nature, as being sort of defined by the modes of material nature that we are in. And in various ways they're all considering this. As Sanatana Goswami reads the guna here, he says we can take it as the three modes of material nature, but we can also take it as the three kind of things that are valued in this world. That a person is made of wealth, a person is made of strength, and a person is made of knowledge. That these are the three things that people in this world strive for. Wealth, power, and knowledge. And so whatever way we want to see it in this way, bidhaya dabhoda krita, they're creating divisions between living entities. They're seeing that, oh, this person is like this person is like that, this person is made of these gunas, this person is made of these gunas, this person strives for wealth, this person strives for knowledge, this person strives for power, or sort of strength, and so on. But they're creating division into as we hear in the Gita, Krishna says that what is the nature of sattva guna is that we see the underlying reality, the one reality that underlies everything. Whereas the mode of passion is you start to see division between things. And they're creating this division, abhoda krita, which is created by being abhoda, by being ignorant, by not seeing things as they are, by the superimposition. And so one might say, oh, so where are we then? We have no hope of coming to any real knowledge. If we see these great rishis, these great philosophers, even they are deluded by things. And what to speak then of someone like me? How can I possibly come to understand these? All these philosophical ideas are quite subtle and difficult to grasp. And it seems it's so easy to kind of go astray. And we see that they're all sort of right in some ways, but wrong in so many other ways as well. And so how can we possibly understand this? As we heard in the previous verse, we cannot understand the Lord, we cannot understand the nature of the Lord, because this is the nature of the Lord and the nature of this world and the nature of ourselves. And here we see all the philosophers are led astray and are deluded. We have our own arupita, we have our own superimpositions by which we come to see things in the wrong way. But then we get the final verse here, the final line of the verse, Tvai natata paratra sabhaveta vabhodarase, where it says, Sa, this thing, this avidya, this ignorance that causes the superimposition, that does not exist in you, O Lord, because you're paratra, you're transcendental to this, you're beyond this. The common image that we see in the Bhagavatam is of ignorance being like darkness and the Lord being like the sun. And so for the sun there is no darkness. The darkness is something that is created by an obstruction of the sun in some ways. As we hear in the 11th canto, that for the sun there is no day and night. We think of in terms of day and night, and we think, oh, now it's day, the sun is here, and in a few hours' time it will be dark and it will be night again. But for the sun there is no day or night. And so for the sun there is or for the Lord there is no ignorance and no knowledge. All of these things are the same. There is just the pure being of pure consciousness of the Lord. As it said here, he's avabodha rase. It says, oh, you Lord, you whose rasa, whose essence, whose essential property is avabodha, is pure consciousness, is pure awareness. And therefore there cannot be any possibility of any ignorance existing in you, just as there cannot be any darkness for the sun. And so what the Vedas are kind of hinting at is that how can we come to real knowledge is we can come to real knowledge from the Lord Himself. This is our only hope, is that when we try to do things on our own, we will invariably become more and more deluded, because the Shaktis, the potencies of the Lord, as we've heard, are there to bewilder us, are there to create different philosophies in us, and to cause us to agree and to disagree with each other. But when we come to the Lord, and when our attention is not focused on the things of this world or our own human capacity to understand things, but is able to turn to the Lord, then we come to see the things as they are. We have this verse that Prabhupada cited often from the Rig Veda, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashanti Surya Diviva Chakshuratatam. That the Suras, the great devotees, what do is they look to the Vishnu Paramam Padam, to the supreme abode of the Lord, which is Diviva Chakshuratatam, which shines in the sky like the eye, like the sun, basically. Now, if you're facing the sun, you have no darkness. The darkness is behind you if you are facing the sun. And so if you're walking and you're constantly facing the sun, you're constantly walking in sunlight and not in darkness. And so this is what we have here, that the Shrutis, the personified Vedas, they're saying this is how we come to real knowledge, as we turn to the Lord, who is avabodha rasa, who is pure awareness, pure consciousness, and has no tinge of ignorance within him. And therefore we can walk in the light of the Lord. And of course, this is then brought down to us through the Lord and his representatives. And so this is the principle of parampara, of the disciplic succession, where we get the teachings of the Lord handed down generation after generation, so that we can have real vision in this world. We can have real knowledge of the Lord in this world through, as it is handed down to us by those whose vision is fixed on the Son of the Lord. And so we can, this morning, as we're reflecting on this, we can be both humble and think that, it's so easy to get things wrong, and we can expect people to get it wrong. Sometimes, as they say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. We become proud because of our knowledge. We think, I'm so much better than all these people. Look at me, I have the truth. I have understood things properly. Whereas all these people, look at them, they're all fools and they're all mistaken. And look at these Vaisheshikas thinking that the world is just made of atoms, or look at these followers of yoga thinking that they can attain the ultimate real through the impermanent, or thinking of the school of Nyaya that they're thinking that the soul is not conscious, or of the school of Sankhya thinking that the soul is not an agent, or of the school of Mimamsa thinking that the agency is best applied to ritual actions, to fruitive actions. Look at them, they're all fools. But we're non-different from that. We were deluded. We are possibly still deluded. Even if intellectually we might have the right conception, then in practice we still fall into some of these categories in our daily life. And so the personified Vedas are here to reminding us that don't become too proud of this. Great rishis have failed, so what to speak of you? And yet at the same time, we can be grateful that we do have knowledge, that we do have the knowledge that Srila Prabhupada brought us, and that he passed us down, that he received from his spiritual master, and that he received from his spiritual master, and so all the way back to the Lord. And that this allows us to see things as they are. Not because we are great, but because the knowledge is great. And the knowledge is great because the source of the knowledge is great. And so, therefore, we can be have the opportunity to come to know the Lord and to come to worship the Lord. And we can look at this and say, yes, it is understandable that people are confused about these things, because these things are very difficult to understand. And the Lord makes it even more difficult through his Shaktis. So anyway, there's some thoughts for this morning, and I'll end there.
Could you tell me what is the difference between Mimamsa and the traditional
Yeah, it's basically the same. So the school of Mimamsa is basically an attempt to develop a philosophy based on karma kanda. So they're just systematizing those ideas and coming up with. I mean, it's the school of Mimamsa is quite complex actually, and the school of Mimamsa is actually very important for us because Vedanta is often called the Uttara Mimamsa, the later Mimamsa, and then Mimamsa is often the Mimamsakas themselves would not call it that, but we sometimes refer to Mimamsa as Purva Mimamsa, the earlier Mimamsa. Or as karma mimamsa. The mimamsa means the systematic inquiry or systematic reflection on karma then. And we say, well, this is the purva mimamsa, this is the earlier kind of reflection. But you need the uttara mimamsa, the later reflection, which is the reflection on the Upanishads, on the teachings of the Upanishad, which teaches about the nature of the soul and the Lord and so on. And so a lot of Vedanta, a lot of the sort of traditional schools of Vaishnavism are deeply rooted in ideas of Mimamsa, but are just saying, yeah, you're kind of okay, but you should have applied this to the right portion of this. And most Vaishnavas argue that there is a continuation between the two actually. So you go through Purva Mimamsa and then to the Uttara Mimamsa, through the Vedanta. Some schools of Vedanta argue that they're separate and you should reject the Purva Mimamsa. But it's basically an attempt to develop a philosophy, a systematic system of thought on the karma kanda, on the ritual portions of the Vedas. Does that make sense?
Yes. I know it will ask you a lot of work, but could you do a PPT or presentation of your class? Because for us, this is really interesting, but we don't have the brain or the knowledge to understand. Is it possible?
Sorry. I understood.
I didn't understand.
He's a great Rishi.
But anyway, for people like me who didn't understand, could it be possible to have a presentation on a PPT or?
Well, you have the purport actually. The purport kind of outlines what I said basically. I mean, it is quite a thing. The Darshan as the schools of Indian thought are quite intricate and complex. Interestingly, in the first canto, Prabhupada says that no one should speak on the Bhagavatam unless they know the 6 darshanas. No one should speak on the Bhagavatam unless they know the 6 darshanas. So in some ways, it's kind of Prabhupada sees it there. I mean, obviously he didn't follow that since from the very beginning, he encouraged his disciples to speak. And his disciples in the very beginning barely knew the Bhagavatam, what to speak of the Sadarshans. But the reason for that is that there's a lot of these ideas that resurface in the Bhagavatam in one way or the other, and the Bhagavatam is kind of commenting on those ideas in some form. But it's a very intricate and complex sort of thing.
You said that this chapter is one of your favorite chapters. And the repeated question is rising. Why is the importance of this chapter really towards the end of the 10th canto? What is this establishment? What wants to convey?
Well, ultimately, it establishes the supremacy of the Lord. And so we get sort of at the end of the 10th canto, after we've all heard the Leelas, we kind of get back into sort of a deep philosophical grounding as to who the Lord is, and which is helpful for us who don't have the spontaneous attraction to the Lord that we see that is the residents of Vrindavan or Dwarka have. So it's kind of, it's establishing that. It's a chapter that many commentators on the Bhagavatam almost treat like its own, like the Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata, but is treated as its own text. And if you read the commentaries of the Acharyas on the Bhagavatam, when you get to this chapter, suddenly they have like whole new invocatory verses, and it's like you're starting new invocatory verses like Mangalacharanas and so on, which you don't normally do only at the beginning of a work. And so they treat this as kind of a separate thing and sort of a special sort of thing. We hear that it's it was a chapter that seems to have been dear to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Sanatana Goswami says, I read this chapter with Mahaprabhu, and he taught me this chapter while they were together. And they didn't spend that much time together, so that the fact that the Lord wanted to teach that to him shows that it was something that was deemed quite important. And we have some like Prabodhananda Saraswati wrote a commentary just on this chapter, not on the whole Bhagavatam, but just this chapter. And there's some other commentaries like that. So it's sort of seen as all the philosophical conclusions of the entire Bhagavatam, as well as all the Vedas, and meaning the Upanishads, are contained in here. And so that's the essence of it. And it's, one of the things I like about it is that the more I read the Upanishads and the more I read this, the more I see in this chapter. It's really the Upanishad, and Jiva Goswami does this in some places where he says, this is the Chandogya Upanishad speaking this verse, and this is the Taittiriya Upanishad speaking this verse, and so on. And you can see it sort of takes those teachings from the Upanishads and brings them to the feet of the Lord, basically, and kind of says, here's how you can meditate on this. Here's how they can point towards the Lord. But they're also just, the Sanskrit is beautiful. The meter is nice to chant. Janima sadasa dom ritimat udatmani yecha vidam. It's just nice to chant it. But it's also very devotional, and it's quite sort of, it really, it's sort of this very uncompromising focus on the Lord, and everything else is of no significance. It's just the Lord is the only reality, which is the Bhagavatam's teachings, in the Chatushloki, what's the first verse? I exist in the beginning, I exist in the middle, I exist alone at the end. That's the only reality. Everything apart from this, in the next verse, is an illusion. And how easily we forget this, but this is what we hear repeatedly in these prayers as well, that the Lord is there in the beginning, the Lord is there in the middle, the Lord is there in the end. Anything else is of no consequence. Which is the sort of thing I think we need to hear, because we often get bewildered by everything else that seems to be there, all our own superimpositions and so on that lead us astray.
To establish our focus and the value of
And the Lord likes to be woken up by these prayers. So.
Sorry for another one. I was just thinking about the question just now in the beginning. It was when we started this chapter, Eka Chakragrama explained that it was a reaction to the question, like, how can something which is indescribable, who is beyond our senses, be described? So this is basically the answer to that. And I was just now thinking, doesn't that also then mean that this chapter is in principle a validation of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, because the Srimad Bhagavatam is describing the indescribable? So can we then see this chapter as the validation of the entire book?
Yeah, and it's not just the whole book, but the practice that is taught in the book. What's the practices that we repeatedly emphasize, the Shravanam Kirtanam. And of course all that falls apart if our hearing and chanting becomes meaningless because it cannot point to the Lord, then why are we doing it? So it's sort of, but the interesting thing about this is that ultimately it says, yes, it is. You can never fully capture the Lord in speech and so on. You can capture the Lord through devotion, but ultimately our speech, my act of speaking is always limited, and therefore it can never capture the unlimited Lord in sort of full. So it's not that it's meaningless, but it's always falling short, basically, of it. And there's lots of reflections on this in the Bhagavatam. This is a recurring theme, actually, in the Bhagavatam, that the Lord is beyond the capacity of speech, and yet at the same time it says, still you should talk about the Lord. And so it's like, forget about the fact, you should know that the Lord cannot be captured in speech, and still you should try and capture him in speech, and you should still talk about him. and we see this with Lord Ananta, as we hear in Bhagavatam, that he has unlimited, he's Ananta, he's limitless, and so he has limitless mouths, and he's constantly describing the glories of the Lord, and yet he's never coming to an end of it. He can never capture the Lord in full. But because he can never capture the Lord in full, therefore he can continue talking about the Lord. And so this is the perfection, and we know we can never exhaust the Lord. It's not like, okay, this morning I think I've said everything there is to say about the Lord, so tomorrow I'll do something else. And it's like, no, tomorrow is like, oh, there's more to say about the Lord, and I can continue praising the Lord, and so it's an ongoing thing, which is wonderful. So anyway, so on that note, I'll let you all have breakfast. Oh.
Okay, with one more question?
Well, you have the microphone, so what can I do? I'm powerless.
Thank you very much. I was thinking while you were speaking, can we understand Achintya, Beda Abeda Tattva doctrine of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as something which we can translate as simultaneously knowing and not knowing, and kind of being comfortable with that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, the concept of Achintya. We kind of apply it in different ways, and we sort of, like Srila Rupa Goswami, he says, Achintya, he says, why is the Lord Achintya? Why is the Lord inconceivable? And he says, well, the Lord is Krishna, and he's a person, and he has a form, which means he's limited, in sort of spatial sense. It's like, here's, this person is situated here, and because they have a form, but it means they're not over there because they're here, and yet Krishna is over here, but he's also over there. and Krishna, as he explains, Krishna, the nature of the Lord is such that he's infinitely varied in attributes. He has unlimited number of qualities, and yet he's also nirvishesha. He's also without any attributes. He's satta matra. He's pure being with no differentiating characteristics. And he says, how can one being have two conflicting qualities or kind of properties? How can one being be both possessing all qualities and be devoid of all qualities at the same time? He says, we can never conceive of this. We can never grasp this. This is the nature of the Lord being Achintya. And then he says, if the Lord were not Achintya, he would not be the Lord. He says it's the nature of the Lord. The nature of God is to be inconceivable, because then God must have powers that are beyond our conception. And therefore, if we think, I've understood the Lord, we've not understood the Lord. We can never do this. And so we're kind of constantly kind of going between those two things. And yet we see that people do understand the Lord. Mother Yashoda, when she sees the universes in the mouth of her little child, she cannot comprehend this. This is beyond her comprehension, and it freaks her out. It's like if you had an experience like that, that's sort of beyond any sort of conception. And so she doesn't know the Lord, and yet then the Lord hides that from him. And then we understand that when she sees Krishna as her son again, then she actually knows the Lord. And so she can be in both states at the same time. She can have both there. And yeah, that's the wonder of the Lord, is that he keeps surprising us in some ways and keeps eluding our grasp. And I think that's why, because there are other schools of Veda and other Vaishnava schools who teach Veda. But Jiva Goswami says it's Achintya Veda. It's and we can read that in two ways. We can see it as the Veda, the difference and the non-difference itself is Achintya, is inconceivable. Or we can see it as it's the difference and non-difference of he who is Achintya, of the Lord who is inconceivable. But I think, our acharyas put a lot of emphasis on the Achintya, that this is ultimately, we can never claim, I know the Lord. We see Brahma in the 10th canto after he's stolen the cows and the cowherd voice. and then realizes his errors. He says, John and 2, let those who think they know the Lord, let they say, I know the Lord. Let them say this, I know, I know, I know. He says, as for me, I will just bow down at your feet. This is the only thing I can do. I cannot know you, and I know I cannot know you, and I'm very happy that I cannot know you. But there are those who say, yes, I know. I say, let them know. let them think they know. As we hear in the Katha Upanishads, the Kena Upanishad says the same thing. It says, those who say they know the Lord, they do not know the Lord. Those who say they do not know the Lord, they know the Lord. So yeah.
The domination, the propensity to dominate by our knowledge is continuously being addressed by emphasis on achintya, so that we just give up on this rasa of trying to dominate, rather than to subordinate, to praise, to be in that state of. But thank you so much. so wonderful. Is it the domination that is the problem actually here? Why we need the instructions of the Vedas?
Yeah, it's there. I mean, we Srila Prabhupada often emphasized knowledge, and Bhagavatam kind of is there to teach us knowledge and so on about the Lord. So it's not that we entirely reject it. There's a foundation for it and there's a use for it. And Prabhupada in Nectar of Devotion says, he says, without becoming a jnani, one cannot stick to the principles of devotional service. So that's the function of it, is there to kind of help us perform devotional service. But it's the idea that that is ultimately up to me, basically. If I can understand the Lord, then I have to understand the Lord. Whereas our path is a path of grace, is a path of, we have the Lord reveals Himself to us, and that's what we're depending on, rather than trying to understand. Because there's an arrogance in that, and there's a sort of a pride in that, in trying to do this. That, as Prabhupada would say, my tiny brain can somehow comprehend the unlimited nature of the Lord. How is that possible? And yet, it's a natural human drive to have certainty. We want certainty. We want to know that what we're doing and what we're committing ourselves to is worthy of that commitment. And therefore we want certitude. And so we see all these philosophers, this is what they're trying to achieve, and that's a noble thing. It's better than people who just go through their lives and,
But is that pertaining to just human nature, or you would say it's part of the soul's?
Well, I suppose, we are kind of a part of the Lord, and sort of therefore we want to understand ourselves means to understand the Lord in some way. But it's the obstinacy and the sort of the pride that comes with that. That's the problem. So anyway, I'll stop here, unless Dina Dayal Prabhu wants to. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gauda Premanande.